Am I live? Good morning. Good morning. Jordan Holland, please. Good morning. There's not many people in life I'll call out, but Jordan and Thomas, we're trying to get... Esther, okay. I grew up with them. I have a right. All good. Well, we're going to jump into Esther chapter 4 here, making our way through this book pretty quickly now. Somebody help me set the stage. Where are we in history? Who is the king that we're dealing with? And what are some of the maybe 2 or 3 things that have happened in the first 3 chapters? Any of those things are valid answers at this point. Yeah, Brian.
From Persia, King Xerxes, or Azher, however you say it.
Ahasuerus, maybe?
Ahasuerus, yeah. And Esther has become queen in the place of Vashti, is that her name?
That's right.
And the evil Haman is angry at Mordecai.
Yep. Why is Haman angry at Mordecai? Yeah, he wouldn't bow to him for whatever the reason, personal, political, God-fearing, we don't really know, but he wouldn't bow down to Haman. And Haman gets his feathers in a ruffle because he had this command made by the emperor himself to force everyone to show him respect, and Haman is not. And so what is Haman's action of recourse here? Kill all the Jews, not Mordecai, not one person that's insulting you. Let's just go wipe out the entire Jewish nation from every province here. And we learned in chapter 3 that the emperor Ahasuerus said, okay. And I get the impression, Bill gave an estimate that the 10,000 shekels offered might have been the whole GDP for a year in Persia. And there's a lot of merriment. All right, we're doing business here. Sometimes after a big deal, the bankers go out to eat it up real big. You can kind of see those wheels turning here between the lines of the story. And they went out and they proclaimed this to every province. And interestingly, it's going to take 10 months, right? There was some lots cast, and Haman wants to take care of all the Jews, but he's going to wait 10 months to do it, and he's going to tell everyone ahead of time he's going to do it. Just some interesting notes here of how this is all carried out, but nonetheless, a trying, a sad, a stressful time, to say the least, for the people of the Jewish nation, no matter where in the empire that you live. Any other thoughts? Anything else? Yeah, Mike.
But it says in 3 verse 9 that Haman said, I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who charge of the king's business. Is that $10,000 each or $10,000 total divided amongst the men?
It says the king's treasuries, which to me means he's going to give it to the accountants to take into the treasury. I don't know if, at least that's how mine tends to read there. But nonetheless, I think it's definitely...
So he may be putting it in himself totally, or he's giving it to the men with the understanding that they'll put it back in the treasury?
Yeah.
Okay.
It enriches the kingdom, which, coming off a big loss of Greece, is probably a very welcome thing, however that works out. Maybe that has something to do with all the provinces and allocating those funds. I don't know, but interesting point. Yeah, Albert.
So, just a high altitude thought, just on where we're at so far. The desire for preservation of Haman and the preservation of his people, and the insight that, okay, if one is able to do that, the insight that I need to take them all. And then you look at today where we're at with our society of all inclusive, and it's a challenge and struggle as well. So not one is better, so I don't have anything aha to say, but it just, you see the struggle and the balance of where we've come today, where everybody's included, and I'm talking in religions as well, to where it makes it a challenge, and it's not the right focus, and the focus isn't in the right spot.
Yeah. Interesting thoughts there. All right, with that, we're going to jump into chapter 4 here. Let's read the first 3 verses. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and he went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. All right, so we see Mordecai learns of this fact, and he's obviously distraught. Any reasons why he might find himself distraught here? I think there's definitely an element of that, a personal element that I have brought this, my actions, whether right or wrong maybe, have brought this calamity upon my people. Yeah, Michael.
I wonder if he regrets making it known that he was a Jew. I mean, we read about that in the last chapter, how he had told some men that, and then they told Haman that, and then, but, in contrast to him asking Esther to keep it a secret that she was a Jew. I wonder if that was part of it, or just, also the whole, maybe if it was an ego thing, like him butting heads with Haman, if he's regretting that maybe it was an impulse thing, like he's feeling bad, second guessing that bad judgment of an impulse decision maybe.
Yeah, Mike.
Also, his kids were killed.
That's right.
And so I think in the same way that if Christians started being killed all over the world, I dare say there's some folks in here that would at least figuratively be in sackcloth and ashes, because it's hurting our kinsmen, it's hurting our people.
That's right. Yeah. He's concerned about the however many millions of Jews this will take out.
I don't remember us talking about it on Wednesday, but the prior verse, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. That just tells me that this was a couple of people that had this really deep animosity, and everyone else is like, where did this come from? What can we do? What should we do about it? What can we do about it?
Yeah, I mean, the confusion is definitely very interesting there, and I don't know that we got a lot of time to dwell on that, but, I mean, can you imagine if, the U.S. government, there's no comment on that, but if they came out and said all people of a certain background, whether religious or race or any other thing, are to be killed in 10 months. What? Oh. Yeah. Well, we'll learn about that, right? I think that's a natural reaction. They were definitely outnumbered. They were spread apart. They were not in a place to go and form an army. But point well made. It would make sense to kind of unite and rebel, which, remember what Mordecai's name means? Rebel with gusto. Kind of interesting. So I think we'll see some of that come out here.
2 other thoughts. First is, this is more than just knowing that other Jews are going to be killed, but all of them are going to be killed.
That's
so
right.
This wailing and sorrow and sackcloth means my wife, my daughters, my children, and myself are going to be killed.
That's right.
And secondly, I can't help but look upon history that the two most persecuted and killed people are the Jews and the Christians, of which thousands of Christians to this day are still being killed, if you'll research it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Certainly, anytime a population is targeted, it's a horrific event. Yeah, Dustin.
Well, I think part of the thing too here is remember that everything in Persian law that's written is irrevocable.
Yeah.
So part of the lament is probably, okay, this can't get repealed.
Yeah.
Like it's gonna happen because it can't take it back.
That's right.
So what are we gonna do?
And that's especially as we get into chapter 5 and 6, we're going to talk a lot about that, because you can't take something back, and even if they convince the emperor, there's not a lot that the layman might see could be done. And I think that speaks to what happens all the more as we get into the story. So I think there's three things here. We said them all. Brian hit on Mordecai himself is going to die. That's enough, right? He's looking at his nation all being wiped out, and I think there's probably some level of personal responsibility here. I read in all this that maybe his refusal to bow down to Haman was more personal than anything, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Anyway, some level of guilt as to his bringing this on. When we hear he was bitter, this bitter cry, this is the same word that Naomi used in Ruth 1:20 and 21. Naomi said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So this word Mara, this bitterness, is the same vocabulary that's used here in Esther, just an absolute emptiness of self and self-pleasure. The sackcloth itself, many have talked about this before probably, but the sack was probably a garment of goat's hair. We see a lot in the Old Testament that this was worn directly against the skin in some of these extreme cases. We see Job, we see in Kings taking off their garments to put on this whatever this coarse garment was, and putting on ashes. That's not lotion, right? That's the opposite of lotion. And what's the point of all this? I think there is a course of public demonstration, right? Yeah. And another element of this is fasting, right? In fact, we read about fasting a lot in the Old Testament, but it's not until the Judges, I need to research this a little bit more, but it's not until the Judges that fasting has any association with abstinence. Look in Leviticus 16, verse 31 real quick. "It is on the Sabbath of solemn rest to you that you shall afflict yourselves." This is the part of the law that's often pointed to in regards to fasting. And really what this is an affliction of the soul, a chance to meditate, to focus on what's really important. And I don't know, I just found it interesting that there's no record of the actual part of abstinence until about the time of the Judges. And if you've ever done a 3-day fast or anything of this nature, you have to focus your mind. It's going to start to try to want to take over and direct you, and you really have to find a place of center just to make it through. And I think the thought here, at least, is let's find a way to focus on God by removing the comfort and the pleasure of everything else. And I say all that, I think Dan's right. There certainly is a level of community display of grief, but we read in the New Testament where Jesus says, when you fast, go do it in a closet. Don't do it for the acclaim of the crowd or the group you're in. Do it for the right reasons. And they do it to get credit from other people. They get their reward. That's not the right reason to do these types of acts of mourning. And maybe that's not pertinent to what is happening here, but surely people who are really in grief are trying to find a way to connect with the Lord and to, Mike.
In light of the scripture,
Mhm.
that also. Why do you think that he made a spectacle? He went out in the middle of the city for his weeping and crying out loud and all that?
Mordecai?
Yeah.
I don't take the tone in this whole message that Mordecai was that great of a Jew. You could debate that. I don't think there's any concrete evidence either way. I think he knew it. I think he knew just enough to be, when we'll learn about some of the things he knew, I think there was a lot of pride and ego going on with Mordecai in this story as well. I don't know if that answers it unilaterally, but that's how I would think about that. It did spread, yeah. That's right. Yeah, no, he certainly not. The fasting and mourning was done by many. And that kind of launches us into verse 4 here, right? Let's read 4 through 9. When Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her the queen was deeply distressed, she sent garments of cloth to Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain to her and command her to go to the king to beg for his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. And Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. So we see here, this whole chapter is kind of like a tennis match of Esther and Mordecai sending these eunuchs and messengers back and forth, the maidens and all of this. I mean, it happens, there's a revolution, I think at least 3 different times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, back and forth. And you kind of have to stop and okay, who's where when to really understand the story. But clearly Esther does not understand what? She's not informed of this decision, right? She was not sitting in the court. In fact, it seems like she doesn't even know this is going on. She's in this house of the queen at this point, you can surmise, and she's got her maidens there, and maybe she's even very insulated. We also get the sense from this and what we learned in chapter 2 that Mordecai visits her regularly and has access to her, and he can't come talk to her. Why can't he come talk to her? Because he has sackcloth on, and the king won't let anyone come into the inner part of the palace with sackcloth on. Why would that be true? That might have something to do with it. If you're the king and you want only good vibes around you, what do? You shut up the bad vibes, right? You want people in their best apparel in front of you. You don't want to see people in squalor. And maybe there's an element of resisting protest. Like, you can't protest to me if you can't get in front of me in that form. And I don't know. Some of that's somewhat speculative. But nonetheless, Esther can't come to see her. And Mordecai can't come to see Esther. And the young women come to her and tell her what? What do they see? Mordecai is making a very public demonstration in sackcloth right at the king's gate, right before the king's gate. And how does she feel about this? Yeah, she's deeply distressed. To really translate the verbiage here, it's to writhe and twist, to wriggle with pain of the heart. You can imagine here. This is not some passive. Oh, what's going on with Mordecai? This is a deep distressed feeling, And she probably wants to see her father, her cousin that has raised her. And so what does she do? She sends these clothes so that he can come in and talk to her. They can have a face-to-face. I think that's kind of, I mean, it's just a side note, I suppose. But at the same time, we see these messengers going back. This would have been a lot easier if Mordecai would have just come on in and had the conversation with Esther, right? And another thing that we're going to start seeing here is they start commanding each other. They are both in a position of authority. And maybe the dynamic since chapters 2 and 3 has started to shift. Because what is Esther? She's the queen of the Persian Empire. She has some authority now. And it's just interesting to kind of watch that language evolve from earlier in the book. The maidens know that Mordecai's sitting there. Mordecai sent this clothing and rejects it, and they start this messenger service. And what does Esther want to know? What does Esther want to know about? What is happening and why is it happening? I need to know the what and the why. She can't do anything unless she understands what's going on, and it also requires context, right? If she didn't understand the whole story and Mordecai's place in it, it might not be that effective to even know what was going on. And so what does Mordecai tell her? Does he give her the soft story? Does he give her the side story? Tells it like it is. Here, you have the decree. Maybe there's some speculation that it had to be drawn up again because Esther could not read the decree in the language it was written in. I don't know. But nonetheless, he goes to great care. This doesn't happen in a 2-minute text back through the messenger, right? He stops. He develops the message. He tells her the exact sum of money. This is a big deal. Does he send her a half-hearted message about what might happen in 10 months? I don't think so. And he asks her to do something, or in fact, he commands her to do what? Go talk to the king. And Hathach comes back and tells her what Mordecai had said. When you put yourself in Esther's shoes, I don't know if we can, but you're in this isolated chamber of the queen's house. Your only family can't come talk to you, and your people are about to die, and the emperor doesn't even know that you're associated with this group of people. In fact, he's probably been in the chambers for the last month celebrating 10,000 shekels of silver coming his way. This is not a good, Esther's not found herself in a good spot many times in the story yet. This is not a good spot for her to find herself. But, yeah.
Safe to say that she wouldn't be able to go directly to the king. She would have to go through this entourage that's between him to make a plea.
That might be true, yeah.
And so, hey, I need to talk to the king because my people just got a decree. They're going to be wiped out. And who's in that party?
Yeah. Thinking back to chapter 2, was Ahasuerus pleased with Esther? Yes. What would keep him from Esther we're about to learn, for a whole month? Celebration of big business, partying, this whole entourage that might be in the way. Yeah, Jordan.
Maybe Albert, just take yours one step further. Who put her in this situation? It was Mordecai specifically. I mean, he's the one that put her forth, and I think Bill mentioned this glorified beauty patch to begin with. So yeah, she's in a difficult situation, and if she wanted to, where could she trace the source of all this? Mordecai himself is the one that kind of got me into the situation.
Mm-hmm. What might you be thinking if you're Esther?
Well, first, Mordecai invokes God. He says, "Who knows that you are appointed to royalty for a situation such as this?" In the coming passages, and her best I can tell, her first reaction is, "I've got to do something about this."
Do you think that's her first reaction? Well, there's some. Let's put it this way: there's some hesitation before she gets there, right? And I think that's what we're about. She has difficulty getting there for sure. That's where we're about to go. I think it's easy to see Esther, maybe it's a day, maybe it's a moment, where she takes a breath and thinks, he doesn't even want to see me right now. What is it? Does Mordecai know what he's asking me to do in this moment? So this is not written here. I'm speculating, but you can easily see how is he in his right mind? He's sitting wailing in sackcloth and ashes. Does he know what he's saying to me? Like, I need to be really clear. Yeah, Terry.
I think it is written there. She says, "Go back and tell Mordecai, don't you know anybody that goes into the king, if he's not accepted, they get put to death."
You're a Jew. You're going to go down with the rest of us.
Yeah, I think that part of the conversation is to come for sure. In this, stopping in verse 9, you can. I think you can explain that someone would have thoughts of hesitation, and that I guess that's really my point. But you're both correct. As we get into these next verses, we'll see Mordecai helps her see the truth surrounding these hesitations. So verse 10 through 12, then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. And they went and told Mordecai what Esther said. I do see a moment of pause. You can maybe even see her maidens, who are most likely Persian, say, you can't do that. You know what's about to happen to you if you listen to Mordecai? Or does Mordecai know what he's asking of you? And what did it take? So you walk in front of the emperor, and you can imagine this long hall, and you're standing at an open door. And what did it take to be put to death, according to this passage? He didn't have to move, and you were dead. I mean, he didn't have to take action to see. You think of the gladiator scene where they're like, put him to death or keep it. Like, that's not even much effort, right? And here we see Ahasuerus doesn't even have to do that. But he can save someone from that penalty by extending the scepter. And this is another interesting place where we see this in secular writing, that Herodotus even writes about this act of the scepter and how so few people actually extended the scepter to save their life and death. And you know what that did? That made many people not come voluntarily before King Ahasuerus. It had a very intended effect, and it worked. There are some writings in Herodotus that there was a leader of the 7 families that we talked about just a little bit, and those leaders were exempt from this law, but anyone else in the nation would be subject to this law. And I think it's really easy to see. If you are commanding as an emperor all of these provinces across, do people have a lot of problems? Do people have a lot of needs, a lot of wants, grievances, judicial escalations? I'm deity here, right? Yeah, I'm probably gonna want to show my hand and rule from time to time, but I also want to what? Enjoy my own life, and I don't know. Yeah, someone who has claimed themselves as a deity, I think you can just bake in the assumption of ego and self-pleasure, right? And we see a lot of that by what he boxes out and what he allows in to his own life, his own day-to-day life. And Esther, quite frankly, is not on top of mind. And if she's not top of mind, she's taking a big chance going before the king, possibly being put to death. And I think she is saying here, are you sure this is do you know what you're asking? And do you want me to do it still? And so this messenger back and forth continues. The messenger goes back to Mordecai in verse 13 and tells him these things. And then Mordecai told him to reply to Esther. Basically, he says, yes, I know what I'm asking of you, right? Do you not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews? For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. So you see a couple of things here. Mike, I made that comment about how strong of a Jew Mordecai was, and I don't really know the answer to that. But clearly he knew something of the Old Testament. I think in Daniel we read that those scattered had copies of the scrolls and the scriptures. And what do we see here in verse 13 that he must have had an intimate knowledge of, even if it was from boyhood stories? Preservation of the people. What are some great deliverances that come to mind that probably went through his mind? Red Sea, Exodus, so Moses. Yeah, that's a good one. Conquering the land. Yeah, I think that's a good one, which required some self-sacrifice. I was hoping y'all would shout 5 or 6 of them out at me. I could say, and every one of those has what in common? The leader, the focal point, the way that was accomplished was by someone who had to sacrifice. You think of Joseph. He had to sacrifice a lot in life and ended up being able to save his people. Moses, as you mentioned, was in the king's palace and had to go throw it all away in order to come and save the people and lead them through the Red Sea. And even David in his own personal life, had to start fleeing Saul, and yet God ushered in deliverance. And it seems like Mordecai understands this concept, right? And he says, if you don't do it, what will happen? God will find another way. And what's another way to interpret that? God can and is, this isn't about you. God can and is going to do this with or without you. You are in a position, and maybe the most famous verse in Esther is embedded here, which Brian's already brought up. Who knows if you've been brought to this place by the king as his queen in Persia to save your own people? Who knows if you've been brought here for a reason? And I mentioned that verse in Isaiah last week where it said, "Out of the briar shall come the myrtle." And you can kind of see that here, right? A Jewish woman should not be married to a non-Jewish person through an act of fornication in a very lewd contest and be queen of a Persian empire, right? There's no way to justify our way around that. This is the briar patch that Esther has come out, and out of the briar patch comes this salvation, right? I think the sacrifice is maybe doubling down on that briar patch here, so to speak, is you're going to have to put yourself out there. You're going to have to put yourself in something uncomfortable in order for this myrtle, this salvation to come, just as we see with all of these other salvation stories that Mordecai must be calling on. And it's because of that that he can say, maybe you are in this place for a reason today. And so Esther sends the messenger back and says what? Here's the plan. I'll do it. But you got to get everybody on board. We're all in this together. You've all got to stop and sacrifice and fast. And I will do the same. To everybody, to all the Jews. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Instructions for them at this time, and which is to fast and to pray and to offer sacrifice. I'm inserting, it's not in the text, but I'm inserting to God that this is to be the case.
What other salvation would Mordecai be referencing? God's. What other impetus would she have to listen to Mordecai except for God? I think you can't not see God in these three verses, right? There's no explanation for her actions or Mordecai's faith without God being in the middle of it all, right? Is that fair? So everyone's going to fast, including her and her maidens. And she says this statement, and if I die, I die. I think we see a lot of this in the Old and maybe even in the New Testament. Look at Genesis chapter 43. This is a little different context, but here we see Jacob, Israel, talking to his boys after Benjamin has been held back in Egypt. In 43 verse 13, it says, "Take also your brother and arise and go again to the man. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man," and little do you know it's Joseph, "and may he send you back your brother and Benjamin. As for me, if I'm bereaved of my children, I'm bereaved." He said, "If I perish, I perish. If I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved." Whatever it is, we're going to do the right thing. Whatever the result's going to be, we'll accept that. And we kind of see that here. I see a very strong overlay, and we'll get to this more as we develop this class with Christ. And this is really where that type of Christ starts to really manifest itself. Does this make you think of a particular moment in the crucifixion story? This I perish, thy will be done. Matthew 26:39. And going a little farther, he fell on his face and said, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And so there's definitely some deep layers being built, both historically and as we look forward.
This is why I think she was the savior of people. I don't see that she had this born-again experience of self-sacrifice because she was informed you're going to die anyway. I think it was more of a plaintive cry, what am I going to do? Because as soon as I approach the king, I'll be killed and won't be able to save you. And ultimately she sees her entire race will be wiped out, and she says, well, then I'm going to do it. And if I perish, I perish. I'll sacrifice myself.
Yeah, I can see that. Her saying, is it really good for me to just go die? How can I help if I'm dead? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I kind of have Esther built up.
Yeah.
I think of her as this pure
Yeah.
woman, good Jew. So I don't see her being so self-centered to say, well, listen, my secret's safe, so uncle, you're going to just have to go.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can accept that as a reality, a possible reality here. It's so interesting to me that they take so much time in the story. How much more details could have been here? We could have had a lot more detail, which, quite frankly, I'd really enjoy. But they take a lot of time, whoever the writer is, Mordecai or Ezra, to talk about the messengers going back and forth. And it marks an evolution of thought. There's some reason to evolve the story in this way. And whatever the case was, she needed a little faith strengthening. And I think we see Mordecai give that to her here. But point well taken. I guess as a way of application here, who else is called to self-sacrifice? In general.
Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego.
Yeah.
It throw us in the fire, regardless whether we survive or not. We're still gonna worship our God.
Yeah. Chapter 1 of this book is really hard to stop and take much self-application, except don't be a Persian empire who throws 6 months drunken parties, right? Here as the story evolves, though, we start to really be able to layer on this type of Christ and apply directly. Luke 9, 23 through 26 came to mind. And he said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whoever would save his own life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in glory, and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. I think what we see here, could Mordecai have said this to Esther? The same, I mean, it would have been directly applicable, right? And here we see that being said to all of us. And so we look at the story of Esther as a moment of how do we save our people? How do we self-sacrifice and be willing to take the hit, so to speak, and help those we can around us? Several other verses we could probably hit on. Galatians 2:20 and Matthew 22:36 through 40 all speak to the same thing here. But we have a few minutes left, so let's finish up here. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go and gather all the..." Oh, we've already done that. All right, so we did hit on all of this. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. He's taking commands from the queen. He's taking commands from the... And again, I don't know that that's particularly meaningful for application, but it is interesting development of the story, how they start throwing commands at each other, and they're both listening. So Esther's going to go into the king after 3 days, and that's where we'll pick up on Wednesday night. Any thoughts? Anything that we've missed? Any points that we see here?
Maturity, development, her strength coming out in these verses. I mean, she probably had and I'm picking a random age of 8 years old, but an 8-year-old who loses a parent versus an 8-year-old who has both of them up until the very day. They're matured differently. They grow up differently. Thinking of and knowing what her circumstances are, she's stepping up and stepping into this role.
She could be 14 or 16, Albert. Yeah. We don't know that, but I mean, she could be 22. Yeah. Whatever the case is, she's young and developing as we all do at that age and even now. Good class. Thank you for your thoughts, and we will pick up with chapter 5 on Wednesday.